The shelter was quiet that morning, except for one sound. A faint whimper echoed through the cold metal cages. A German shepherd sat in the corner, his eyes empty, his heart broken. Volunteers said he hadn't wagged his tail in weeks. No one knew his past. No one knew why he cried at night. But today, something changed. As the door creaked open, the dog froze. His ears perked up, his body trembled, and then he began to cry. The man standing before him wasn't just another visitor. He was someone from a life long forgotten. What happened next left everyone in that shelter speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The morning sun filtered weakly through the dusty windows of the city animal shelter, painting faint golden lines across rows of cold metal cages. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, mixing with the quiet sounds of shuffling paws and the soft whimpers of forgotten souls. Most of the dogs stirred as the volunteers passed by, tails wagging, hopeful eyes following anyone who might stop and offer a kind word. But in the farthest corner, one cage remained still. Inside sat a German shepherd, tall, proud once, but now a shadow of what he used to be. His coat had lost its shine, his ribs faintly visible beneath the fur. He didn't bark or wag his tail when people passed. He just sat there staring at the ground as if waiting for someone who never came back. His name tag read Rex, though no one here knew who gave him that name. Poor guy, a young volunteer whispered, pausing at his cage. He hasn't eaten much since he came in. Another worker nodded sadly. He barely sleeps. Cries at night sometimes. Whatever he's been through, it broke him. Rex's ears twitched faintly at the sound of voices, but his eyes never lifted. The faint hum of morning routine, cages opening, bowls clattering, water splashing, surrounded him, yet he seemed trapped in a different world. Outside the sun grew brighter, but inside that kennel time stood still. No one at the shelter knew that this was no ordinary stray. Behind those haunted eyes lay a past filled with loyalty, courage, and loss. But on this quiet morning, as another day began, something in the air shifted. Fate was already moving, bringing someone to that very gate who would change everything. Days passed and Rex remained the same, silent, withdrawn, and unreachable. Volunteers came and went, trying to win his trust with treats and gentle words, but nothing seemed to reach him. When someone approached his cage, he would lift his head slowly, eyes dull and tired, as if asking, "Why am I still here?" Then he would lower it again, curling into the corner, his breath slow and heavy. His body carried stories no one could read. A faint scar ran across his front leg, the kind only a working dog would earn. His fur was coarse in places, soft in others, showing signs of an old uniform harness that had once fit snugly around his chest. Every loud noise and a clanging door, a siren from the street, made him flinch. But he never growled, never barked. He simply endured. At night, the shelter grew quiet. That's when the crying began, soft broken sounds that echoed down the metal corridors. The staff would find Rex trembling in his sleep, his paws twitching as if running toward something or someone far away. They called it separation anxiety, but it wasn't just that. It was grief. Sometimes in his restless dreams he could almost smell it. The scent of smoke, the sound of heavy boots, the warmth of a familiar voice calling his name. "Rex, stay." The command would echo faintly, fading into silence as he woke, panting and confused. The others' dogs barked for attention, but Rex never joined them. His world had shrunk to that small square of concrete and wire. And yet deep inside a spark still lived, a fragment of the proud canine he once was. He didn't know it yet, but the man who would rekindle that spark was already closer than he could imagine. It was a Thursday morning when Tom first walked through the shelter doors. The scent of disinfectant and the echo of barking hit him all at once. He paused by the entrance, adjusting his worn-out jacket, unsure what had brought him there. He wasn't looking to adopt. At least that's what he told himself. He had simply signed up as a volunteer after seeing a flyer at the grocery store. But the truth was he'd been restless for weeks, haunted by something he couldn't quite name. "Morning," called out a cheerful volunteer named Sarah. "You must be the new guy. We're short on hands today. The shepherds could use some attention." Tom nodded, offering a polite smile, but his mind was already wandering. The air was thick with emotion, every bark carrying a story of loss. Then his gaze fell on the last cage at the end of the row. There he was, Rex, sitting still, unmoving, eyes fixed on nothing. For a moment Tom froze. Something about that dog. It hit him deep in the chest. He took a slow step forward, drawn by an invisible pull. When he reached the cage, Rex lifted his head. Their eyes met. A brief moment, no more than a second, but enough to send a chill down Tom's spine. The German shepherd's gaze wasn't that of a stray. It was knowing, searching, almost familiar. Careful with that one, Sarah warned gently from behind him. He doesn't like people near his gate. Tom didn't move. What's his name? He asked quietly. Rex, she replied. Came in a few months ago. Nobody knows much about him. Tom nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the dog. Rex, he repeated under his breath. The name lingered like a memory he couldn't quite reach. He didn't know it yet. But this meeting wasn't by chance. It was the beginning of something fate had been waiting years to finish. Later that afternoon, as Tom helped clean kennels and refill water bowls, he found himself glancing toward Rex's cage again and again. Something about that dog gnawed at him, a strange ache in his chest every time their eyes met. He tried to shake it off, focusing on his tasks, but his curiosity refused to rest. During lunch break, Tom sat beside one of the senior staff members, an older man named George, who had worked at the shelter for over a decade. George noticed where Tom's gaze kept drifting and gave a quiet chuckle. You've got your eyes on the shepherd, huh? Tom nodded. Yeah, there's something about him. Feels like he's waiting for someone. George's smile faded. He lowered his voice. That dog's been through more than most. We got him from a rescue unit. He used to be a working K9, trained, disciplined, loyal to the bone. But after his handler died in an accident, Rex went off the radar. They found him wandering miles away, half-starved, refusing to let anyone near. Took weeks to calm him down. Tom's heart tightened. So he lost his partner? Yeah, George said softly. And he never recovered. He won't let anyone touch him now. Some folks say he's dangerous. But I think he's just broken. The words hit Tom harder than he expected. A cold shiver ran through him. A K9 who lost his handler. A loyal soul left behind. Something about it felt too close, too personal. As George got up to leave, he added, If you're smart, kid, keep your distance. Some scars can't be healed, but Tom didn't look away. His eyes stayed fixed on Rex's cage, and deep inside he knew he couldn't. The next morning, Tom arrived earlier than usual. The air was cool and quiet, sunlight just beginning to spill through the narrow windows. He carried a small bag of treats, though he doubted they would make much difference. Still, something inside told him to try. He walked slowly down the corridor until he reached the last cage, Rex's cage. The German shepherd was awake, lying still, eyes open but empty. Hey, buddy, Tom said softly, crouching down. His voice was calm, gentle, the way you'd speak to an old friend after years apart. Rex didn't move. His gaze flickered briefly toward the man, then returned to the floor. The silence between them stretched thin, fragile as glass. Tom placed a treat on the ground outside the bars and waited. Nothing. Minutes passed. Then, almost imperceptibly, Rex's nose twitched. He sniffed the air, but he didn't move closer. It wasn't the smell that stirred him. It was the voice. Something in that tone, low and steady, brushed against a memory buried deep within. Tom exhaled quietly. It's okay, he murmured. You're safe now. Still no movement. On instinct, he whispered a single word, one that rose from somewhere he couldn't explain. Stay! The effect was instant. Rex froze. His ears perked up sharply, eyes locked on Tom with sudden intensity. For the first time, emotion flashed in them. Confusion, disbelief, recognition. Tom blinked, startled. What is it? He whispered, his heart pounding. Rex slowly stood, muscles tense, tail trembling as if fighting to remember something. From across the hall, Sarah called out, Everything okay? Tom didn't answer. His eyes never left Rex. Something electric pulsed between them, faint but undeniable. For the first time since he'd entered that shelter, Rex wasn't just surviving. He was remembering, and that single word, stay, had just begun to unlock the door to his past. That night, long after the shelter lights dimmed and the last volunteer had gone home, Rex lay awake in the silence of his kennel. The world outside slept, but his mind wandered into a place between memory and dream, a place he hadn't visited in a long time. He could hear it again, the crunch of boots on gravel, the hum of engines, the voice that used to mean safety. Rex, heel. Rex, search. That same calm, commanding tone. The world in his memory wasn't cold and gray like the shelter. It was alive, filled with the scent of pine, the thrill of sirens, and the warmth of a hand patting his head after every mission. But then the memory shifted. The sound of tires screeching. A blinding flash. The metallic scream of tearing steel. Rex barked frantically in his dream, his paws thrashing as if trying to break free from an invisible cage. And then, just as suddenly, the voice was gone and replaced by silence. Endless, suffocating silence. He jolted awake, panting, heart racing. The shelter was still dark, but his ears caught a faint sound. Footsteps in the hallway. Tom. The man moved quietly, checking cages on his way out after a late shift. He whispered to the other dogs, his voice low and soothing. When he passed Rex's cage, the shepherd lifted his head. For a second, their eyes met through the dim light. Tom paused. The look in those eyes wasn't just fear. It was longing. Tom crouched down, whispering almost instinctively, "You were trained once, weren't you?" Rex tilted his head slightly. That voice, that tone, it stirred something that felt almost like home. As Tom stood and walked away, Rex pressed his nose against the bars, watching him go. Deep inside, the fog of pain began to thin, and through it, a single memory burned brighter than the rest. A face, a hand, and a promise that had never truly been broken. The next day, Tom couldn't shake the image of those eyes from his mind. All morning he found himself distracted. At work, in traffic, even over his morning coffee. Something about that dog lingered in his thoughts like an unfinished sentence. By afternoon he'd made up his mind. He was going back. When Tom walked into the shelter, the air was filled with the usual sounds of barking and shuffling paws, but his focus was locked on one place, the last cage at the end of the row. Rex was there, lying silently, his head resting on his paws. "Hey, buddy," Tom said quietly, kneeling by the bars. Rex lifted his head. Their eyes met again, and for a brief second that emptiness flickered. Tom smiled faintly and reached into his bag. "I brought something for you." He pulled out an old faded police jacket, dark navy worn at the edges. The shelter's lost and found box had been full of random donations, but this jacket had stood out to him. Something about it felt right, like it belonged here. He laid it gently outside the cage. "You remember this smell, don't you?" Rex hesitated, then slowly moved closer. His nose twitched as he sniffed the jacket, once, twice, and then froze. His tail gave the faintest tremor, his ears perking up in recognition. A small whine escaped his throat, soft but heart-wrenching. Tom's chest tightened. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe now." For the first time, Rex didn't turn away. His gaze stayed fixed on Tom, filled with something new. Not fear, not sadness, but the fragile beginnings of trust. It was the first crack in the wall that grief had built around his heart. The next few days passed quietly, but something in Rex had changed. He no longer turned away when Tom approached. Instead, he watched the man carefully, his sharp eyes studying every move, the tilt of his head, the rhythm of his voice, even the way he breathed. There was something familiar about it all, something buried deep within the fog of memory. That morning, Tom arrived early again. The sun spilled through the high windows, bathing the shelter in soft gold. He stopped by Rex's cage, crouching low. "Morning, partner," he said softly without thinking. The word partner rolled off his tongue naturally, a word he hadn't used in years. Rex's ears flicked at the sound, his head lifting sharply. Tom smiled faintly. "You remember that word, don't you?" His tone was calm, steady. He slowly opened the latch to the outer gate, careful not to startle him. "It's okay, buddy. I'm not here to hurt you." Rex tensed but didn't retreat. His gaze locked on Tom's face, searching, questioning. Then as Tom whispered another phrase, something inside the dog broke open like sunlight through clouds. "Good boy. Partner." The change was instant. Rex's tail twitched, his body trembling. A low, broken whine escaped him as he took one hesitant step forward. Tom froze, afraid to move, afraid to break the fragile moment unfolding before him. Rex's nose brushed against Tom's hand, a brief touch, trembling and unsure, but real. Then came the sound that silenced the entire room. A soft, choked whimper that turned into quiet crying. Sarah, watching from across the hall, gasped. He's never done that before. Tom's throat tightened. He didn't know how or why, but deep down he already felt the truth stirring. This wasn't just any rescue. This was recognition. A reunion years in the making, written not in words but in the heartbeat shared between a man and his lost friend. The moment hung in the air, fragile and still. Tom stayed perfectly still, his hand resting near the edge of the cage. Rex's nose brushed against his palm again, firmer this time, as if making sure the man in front of him was real. Then, with a trembling step, the German shepherd closed the distance. His eyes glistened, and before anyone could process what was happening, the dog pressed his head into Tom's chest and began to cry. Actual tears streamed down his fur, wetting Tom's shirt. The sound wasn't a bark or a whine. It was something deeper, rawer, as if years of confusion and heartbreak were being poured out all at once. The entire shelter froze. Volunteers who had been cleaning stopped mid-motion. Sarah dropped her clipboard, her mouth falling open. No one had ever seen Rex behave this way. Not with anyone. Tom's hands shook as he slowly reached forward, letting his fingers rest against the dog's neck. The contact sent a rush of emotion through him. Flashes of sirens, the smell of smoke, the weight of a vest on his shoulders. His breathing quickened as memories began to surface, memories he thought he'd buried long ago. He whispered hoarsely, "Rex, it's you." The sound of his name made the dog whimper harder, pawing weakly at Tom's leg. Sarah took a hesitant step forward, eyes wide. "Tom, what's going on?" Tom didn't answer. His throat tightened, his eyes glassy. He cupped Rex's face in his hands, looking into those familiar brown eyes. Eyes he'd seen through fire, through chaos, through the darkest nights of his life. "I thought you were gone," he murmured. Rex leaned closer, pressing against him with all the strength he had left, his tail moving faintly for the first time in months. In that silent room, surrounded by astonished onlookers, man and dog found what both had lost: recognition, forgiveness, and a bond that had never truly broken. For everyone else, it was a miracle. But for Tom and Rex, it was something far greater. It was home finding its way back, after all the years of being lost. Tom sat on the cold shelter floor, his arms wrapped around Rex as if afraid the moment would vanish. The world around them blurred, the voices, the lights, the faint smell of bleach. Everything melted into the background. All he could hear was Rex's uneven breathing and the pounding of his own heart. Years of pain, confusion, and unanswered questions were suddenly alive again, demanding to be felt. George, the senior staff member, stood nearby, his brow furrowed in disbelief. You know this dog?" he asked softly. Tom nodded slowly, his voice trembling. "He's not just any dog. He's my partner, my canine partner." He ran a hand over Rex's head, the familiar feel of the coarse fur sending shivers down his spine. "We worked together for 5 years. We were inseparable." He paused, swallowing hard. Then, that night happened. The memory flooded back like a storm. A high-speed chase. Rain pounding against the windshield. Rex barking from the passenger seat, alert and ready. The suspect's car swerving out of control, tires screeching, metal twisting. Then darkness. "When I woke up," Tom continued quietly, "they told me he didn't make it. That he was thrown from the vehicle and couldn't be found. I searched for months, but they said it was hopeless." His voice cracked. "I believed them." Rex whimpered softly, pressing his head against Tom's knee, as if trying to tell him he remembered too. The sirens, the crash, the moment they were torn apart. "I left the force after that," Tom said, his gaze distant. "Couldn't do it anymore. Every day I blamed myself." George shook his head slowly. "And all this time?" "He was alive." Tom looked down at Rex, tears welling in his eyes. "He wasn't just alive," he whispered. "He was waiting for me." In that moment, man and dog sat in silence. Two souls who had carried the same wound for years, finally finding each other again. The pain was still there, but for the first time it didn't feel unbearable. It felt shared, and that made all the difference. Over the next few weeks, the shelter became more than a workplace for Tom. It became a second chance. Every morning he arrived before opening hours, carrying the same quiet determination. He didn't rush things with Rex. He knew trust couldn't be forced. Instead, he sat by the cage each day, talking softly, sharing stories the dog couldn't understand but somehow seemed to feel. At first, Rex stayed cautious, watching from a distance. But gradually, the space between them began to shrink. Each visit chipped away at the wall that trauma had built. Tom would toss a ball gently through the bars, the same kind they used during training years ago. And though Rex didn't chase it right away, he would sniff it, paw at it, then glance back at Tom as if remembering the game they used to play. One afternoon, Tom entered the kennel with George's permission. He knelt slowly, extending his hand. "It's me, partner," he whispered. "It's really me." Rex hesitated for a heartbeat, then stepped forward. His nose touched Tom's palm, warm and trembling. It wasn't fear anymore. It was recognition. Tom smiled through wet eyes. "Good boy." From that moment, everything changed. Training commands came naturally again. Sit, stay, heel. And Rex obeyed them instantly, his instincts waking like embers catching flame. The staff watched in awe as the once broken dog began to stand taller, eat better, and even wag his tail. Each passing day, the bond between man and dog grew stronger, as if time had merely paused, not erased, their connection. Tom would sometimes whisper, "We made it, didn't we?" And Rex would rest his head on his lap, eyes closing in quiet peace. The healing wasn't just Rex's, it was Tom's too. Two hearts that had been fractured by the same tragedy were finally learning how to be whole again. Together. The paperwork sat neatly stacked on the front desk, a small but life-changing set of forms. Tom held the pen in his hand, staring down at the line where his name was supposed to go. Around him, the shelter buzzed with quiet excitement, volunteers whispering, smiling, a few even tearing up. Everyone knew what this meant. Rex sat by the gate, tail wagging faintly, eyes brighter than they had been in months. He watched Tom closely, as if afraid that if he blinked, the man might disappear again. The air carried a strange tension, a mix of joy, disbelief, and healing. George, standing nearby, chuckled softly. "You sure about this, kid? Once you sign that paper, there's no going back." Tom smiled faintly, the pen trembling slightly in his hand. "There was never any going back," he said quietly. He signed his name in one smooth motion, the ink soaking into the page like a promise finally fulfilled. A cheer went up from the staff. Sarah clapped her hands, her eyes misty. "He's finally going home." Tom crouched beside Rex, unclipping the leash. The German shepherd stepped forward, hesitant at first, then more certain with each stride. When they reached the exit, Rex stopped and looked back one last time at the cage that had been his world. Cold metal, cracked concrete, the ghosts of nights spent waiting. Tom followed his gaze and whispered, "You'll never see this place again, buddy." "Not as long as I'm breathing." Rex let out a soft whine and pressed his head against Tom's leg. Together, they stepped through the shelter doors into the sunlight, free, reunited and ready to start the next chapter of their story. Tom parked his truck outside his small suburban home, the afternoon sun painting the sky in shades of gold. He stepped out slowly, glancing at the passenger seat where Rex sat, watching everything with cautious curiosity. The dog's ears twitched at the distant sounds of birds and children playing, sounds he hadn't heard freely in so long. "Come on, partner," Tom said softly, opening the door. Rex hesitated for a moment, sniffing the air. Then with a deep breath, he jumped down, landing on familiar soil. The old house stood just as Tom had left it, the white fence, the front porch, and the worn tennis ball lying near the yard. Rex's tail moved faintly. He remembered. The backyard, the one where he used to run, train, and rest by Tom's side after long shifts. Tom watched him step forward slowly, his paws brushing the grass as if confirming it was real. Then, without warning, Rex broke into a short sprint, circling the yard once before bounding back toward Tom, barking. Not in fear this time, but in joy. Tom laughed through the tears forming in his eyes. "That's my boy," he whispered, kneeling as Rex pressed his head against his chest once more. That night, Tom sat on the porch with Rex lying beside him. The soft breeze carried the scent of home, the sound of peace. For the first time in years, both of them breathed freely. No cages, no ghosts of the past. Just the simple comfort of being together again. For Tom, the silence of loss had finally been replaced by something better. The heartbeat of loyalty and love, steady and strong beside him once more. The video started as a shaky clip filmed on a volunteer's phone, a man kneeling in front of a German shepherd, the dog crying softly in his arms. But what happened next turned into something no one could have predicted. Within hours of being uploaded, the clip spread like wildfire across social media. Comments flooded in from around the world. This made me cry. Proof that love never dies. That dog waited years for his best friend. News outlets picked it up, animal rescue pages shared it, and soon, Rex and Tom's reunion became a global symbol of loyalty and second chances. Shelter staff watched in awe as their humble facility suddenly became the center of attention. Donations poured in, adoption inquiries tripled, and people from other cities began visiting just to meet the volunteers who had witnessed the miracle. "It's changing lives," Sarah said tearfully, scrolling through the flood of messages. People are saying they adopted dogs because of them. Tom was overwhelmed. Reporters asked for interviews, but he turned most of them down. "This story isn't about me," he said simply. "It's about him, and every animal still waiting for their person to come back." Rex, meanwhile, didn't care about fame. He spent his days curled up at Tom's feet, tail thumping lazily whenever his name was mentioned. Every time Tom looked at him, he saw not a viral hero, but his partner, his family, his reason to believe again. The world saw a touching reunion, but for Tom and Rex it was something quieter, deeper, the universe's way of saying that no bond, no matter how broken by time, is ever truly lost. Night had fallen, wrapping the quiet house in a blanket of stillness. The soft hum of crickets echoed outside, and moonlight spilled gently through the window, casting silver lines across the wooden floor. In the dim glow, Tom lay on his bed, one arm draped loosely over the edge. Below him on the rug, Rex rested, his chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. For the first time in years, the shepherd slept without flinching, without nightmares. His body was relaxed, his breathing slow. Every so often, his tail thumped softly against the floor, as if even in dreams he was content just knowing he was home. Tom stirred slightly, glancing down. "You found me again, buddy," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Rex's ears twitched at the sound, his eyes opening halfway, calm and trusting. He gave a quiet sigh and pressed his head against Tom's hand. In that small moment, everything felt right. The years of pain, separation, and uncertainty finally giving way to peace. The house, once silent and empty, now breathed with warmth again. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying the faint echo of their shared past, the commands, the sirens, the loyalty that never died. Inside, the bond between man and dog had come full circle. As Tom drifted toward sleep, his fingers brushed the fur of the partner he'd lost and found again. A smile touched his lips. "Good night, partner," he murmured. Rex let out a soft, contented breath and the sound of a soul finally at rest. And as the night deepened, two hearts beat in quiet harmony, proof that even after years of darkness, love always finds its way home.